Welding safety, controlling fumes and gases. Objectives: understand the basic requirements of controlling welding fumes and gases. Background: welding joins materials together by melting a metal workpiece along with a filler metal to form a strong joint. The welding process produces visible smoke that may contain harmful metal fume and gas byproducts. This fact sheet discusses welding operations, applicable OSHA standards, and suggestions for protecting welders and co-workers from exposures to the many hazardous substances in welding fumes. Should note that the information in this presentation is taken from OSHA's fact sheet on controlling hazardous fuming gases during welding. Types of welding. Welding is classified into two groups: fusion, heat alone, or pressure, heat and pressure welding. There are three types of fusion welding: electric arc, gas, and thermite. Electric arc welding is the most widely used type of fusion welding. It employs an electric arc to melt the base and filler metals. Arc welding types in order of decreasing fume production include flux core arc welding, which is filler metal electrode, flux shield, shielded metal arc. Electrode provides both flux and filler material. Gas metal arc is widely used. Consumable electrode for filler material, external gas shield, and then tungsten inert gas, which is a superior finish. It's non-consumable electrode, externally supplied inert gas shield. Gas or oxy-fuel welding uses a flame from burning a gas, usually acetylene, to melt metal at a joint to be welded. It is a common method for welding iron, steel, cast iron, and copper. Thermite welding uses a chemical reaction to produce intense heat instead of using gas fuel or electric current. Pressure welding uses heat along with impact-type pressure to join the pieces. Oxy-fuel and plasma cutting, along with brazing, are related to welding as they all involve the melting of metal and the generation of airborne metal fume. Brazing is a metal joining process where only the filler metal is melted. General information. What is in welding fumes? There are certain metals in welding fumes. Those include aluminum, antimony, arsenic, beryllium, cadmium, chromium, cobalt, copper, iron, lead, manganese, molybdenum, nickel, silver, tin, titanium, vanadium, and zinc. Gases. Shielding. You have argon, helium, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. Gas processes. Nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, phosgene, hydrogen fluoride, carbon dioxide. Factors that affect worker exposure to welding fumes: the type of welding process, the base metal and filler metals used, welding rod composition, the location, such as being outside or in enclosed spaces, welder work practices, air movement, and use of ventilation controls. Health effects. Acute exposure to welding fumes and gases can result in eye, nose, and throat irritation, dizziness, and nausea. Workers in the area who experience these symptoms should leave the area immediately, seek fresh air, and obtain medical attention. Prolonged exposure to welding fumes may cause lung damage and various types of cancer, including lung, larynx, and urinary tract. Health effects from certain fumes may include metal fume fever, stomach ulcers, kidney damage, and nervous system damage. Prolonged exposure to manganese fume can cause Parkinson's-like symptoms. Gases such as helium, argon, and carbon dioxide displace oxygen in the air and can lead to suffocation, particularly when welding in confined or enclosed spaces. Carbon monoxide gas can form, posing a serious asphyxiation hazard. Welding and hexavalent chromium. Chromium is a component in stainless steel, non-ferrous alloys, chromate coatings, and some welding consumables. Chromium is converted to its hexavalent state, Cr (Vi), during the welding process. Chromium fume is highly toxic and can damage the eyes, skin, nose, throat, and lungs, and can cause cancer. OSHA regulates worker exposure to chromium 6 under its chromium 6 standard 29 CFR 1910 1026 and 1926 1126. OSHA's permissible exposure limit, or PEL, for chromium 6 is 5 micrograms per cubic meter as an 8-hour time-weighted average. Reducing exposure to welding fumes. Welders should understand the hazards of the materials they are working with. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard requires employers to provide information and training for workers on hazardous materials in the workplace. Welding surfaces should be cleaned of any coating that could potentially create toxic exposure, such as solvent residue and paint. Workers should position themselves to avoid breathing welding fumes and gases. For example, workers should stay upwind when welding in open or outdoor environments. General ventilation, the natural or forced movement of fresh air, can reduce fume and gas levels in the work area. Welding outdoors or in open working spaces does not guarantee adequate ventilation. In work areas without ventilation and exhaust systems, welders should use natural drafts along with proper positioning to keep fume and gases away from themselves and other workers. Other ways to reduce exposure to welding fumes. Exhaust ventilation systems can be used to remove fume and gases from the welder's breathing zone. As noted earlier, exhaust fans, natural drafts, and portable fans can reduce the exposure to the welding plume. Consider substituting a lower fume generating or less toxic welding type or consumable. Do not weld in confined spaces without ventilation. Respiratory protection may be required if work practices and ventilation do not reduce exposures to safe levels. Quiz. Number 1. Welding is classified into two groups: fusion, which is heat alone, or pressure, heat and pressure welding. A, true, B, false. 2. One factor that affects worker exposure to welding fumes is air movement. A, true, B, false. 3. Acute exposure to welding fume and gases can result in eye, nose, and throat irritation, dizziness, and nausea. A, true, B, false. 4. Welding surfaces should be cleaned of any coating that could potentially create toxic exposure, such as solvent residue and paint. A, true, B, false. 5. Do not weld in confined spaces without ventilation. A, true, B, false.